To understand men, you must understand hierarchy. With Tom Golden. Men are good, as are you. Today we're going to talk about hierarchy. Why hierarchy? Well, guess what? Most males live in a hierarchical world. Their world is literally based on this thing that we call hierarchy. Now, this is not all males. In fact, the degree of hierarchy that I've seen men have varies. Some have a lot of it, some have a medium amount, and some have a little bit. It's kind of like height. Most men are certain height, but you've got some that are taller and some that are even taller still. And you've got women who are also very tall. But in general, most men are taller and probably are going to have more of the hierarchy thing than the women. That's my guess anyway. But it's an important guess to make because this hierarchy thing is critical. If you don't know about it, how can you understand men? Because you really need to understand hierarchy in order to understand men. And what I see in the psychological professionals today is a lot of people who don't have a clue about hierarchy. They don't have a clue about the way men see the world and the way men move into the world, which is based on this whole hierarchical nature. In fact, it's even worse than that. What I see from psychological professionals is that they try and think that men need to be more like women. They need to talk about it. They need to cooperate. This is not hierarchy. This is a different thing altogether. We'll talk about the women's side of things in a minute. But think about it. The men's side is more hierarchical. Not always, but most men, it's more hierarchical. Now, what is this thing called hierarchy and where did it come from? And the answer to that question is really fascinating. If you look at the animal kingdom, almost all mammals and some birds, I think, are broken down. The sexes are broken down into two categories. One sex is what they call the competers, and one sex is called the choosers. Now, the choosers are the ones who choose their mates, and they're the ones who spend more time with the children. They're the ones who do the childbirth usually. They're the ones who take care of the children. And so they choose their mate, and the competer is the one who competes to be chosen by them to be the mate, right? And so that whole process of being chosen, what does he have to do? It's usually the he. But what he has to do is he has to prove to this mate that he is going to be good enough. And what does he do? He strives for status. He tries to get as much status as he possibly can because that's what she's going to choose a mate depending upon. Think about the Bowerbirds. Gosh, these Bowerbirds make these wonderful bowers that are intricate, and they have little pieces of trash and trinkets and everything all in between. And the female bowerbirds will come and choose the bower that they like the most. And based on that bower, they will choose their mate. So the bowerbird spends a lot of time figuring out how to make the best bower he can. And in fact, he also spends a little bit of time going out and ruining other bowerbirds, other males' bowers, so that his will be the best. It's a tricky business. But, the bighorn sheep is another one, where what do? In order to gain status, in order to prove that they can provide and protect, boom, they go out and bash heads. They bash heads until one is left, and he is the one who gets the access to the top-rated females. So you see how it works? This is a hierarchy. Who's first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth? That makes all the difference in the world. And that's what these animals strive for, is to be that one who is coming in first. And we see the same thing with men. We see the exact same thing. Men will strive for status. They will strive to put themselves up into a position where they're the ones who are chosen as a mate. And all you guys, you can remember when you were in middle school and high school, how you had to try and put your best foot forward. You had to try and look like you had as much status as you could have in order to be chosen as a potential suitor. It was a tricky business, but we worked hard to be able to do that. Now, this whole striving for status thing has a biological component to it. And guess what that component is? Good old testosterone. Testosterone is pushing us from the side. What does testosterone do? It tells us to strive for status. strive for status, strive for status. And so we're pushed from the time we're little guys, and even more after puberty, we're pushed into striving for status, wanting to be first, wanting to be on top. And this is a little bit confusing too, because I can hear a couple of you thinking, I never tried to be first. And you may be right, because here's the deal. I mean, some boys in school, think about it, some boys would strive for status by getting really good grades. Remember those boys? I bet you do. Some boys would strive for status by being on the football team, being a starter, you know. And other boys would strive for status by seeing how many days they could skip each year, right? Or who could insult the vice principal more, right? Yeah. I mean, these are all different ways to strive for status, because in their niche, that status rose them higher and higher, right? And we see it all the time. Men have very different ways to strive for status. You know, the academe wants to be in the best journals. You know, the just about any profession, any male profession you think of, you can find ways that men will strive for status in order to get up higher. Now, what is this status thing? What is it in humans? You know, in animals, it's butting heads, and it's usually physical. But with us humans, it's a little bit different, because we're a little bit more evolved, hopefully. And so we do things more evolved. Our status is not just physical. It's not just brawn. What is it? Well, it's all kinds of things. Who's got more money? Who's taller? You know, the height has to do with status. Who's got more fame? Who has more property? Who gets better grades? All of these things pile in together, and guess what? The women, the choosers, will choose the one who has the highest status, right? I mean, think about it. Over and over again, we see that happen. And women will choose the higher status male. I mean, I've thought for years that if only we could teach women how to choose compassionate males, males would strive for status to be the most compassionate guy they could be, you know? But, you know, that's not what women are choosing. Women are choosing guys who have status like money, strength, power, fame, things like that. Now, like I said, the humans, the whole hierarchy thing is, or the striving for status thing is a little bit different, because it's not just the men who are striving for status. The women have their hierarchy also where they strive for status. And in the women's hierarchy, what do they strive for? They strive to be the most attractive they can be. Think about it. The daggone makeup industry, $64 billion a year. $64 billion a year. The NFL, the NHL, and the NBA combined, I think their total for a year is $32 billion, half of what makeup is. So women are really striving hard, right? That's their way to compete, and they do that. And think about it. Women know who's first, second, third, fourth. They know where they come in. But the men know also where they are first, second, third, fourth. And we learned this very early. When I was a little guy, you know, we'd choose sides, right? We were going out to play baseball. We'd have 15 people there. We'd choose sides. What happens when you choose sides? When you choose sides, you make the hierarchy visible. And so I was never chosen first, man. I'll grant you that, unless it was a really good friend. I was usually in the middle or towards the bottom. And please not last, please not last, please not last. Because what's it doing? It's mapping out the hierarchy. It's mapping out the hierarchy. So as a boy, I knew all the other boys who were better than me. And I knew that I had to do something different in order to play. You know, I'd play catcher because nobody else wanted to play catcher. So I had to find out what my team needed in order to be a part of things, because I knew hierarchically I was not as good as these other guys. And that's a really important lesson. And men use this hierarchy all the time. You know, women get insulted by it sometimes, but men honor it. They honor it. They live it. I mean, think about it. Men's hierarchy is worn on their sleeve when they go out in the military, right? The sergeant has 3 to 5 stripes, 4 to 5 stripes, 4 to 6. The private has 1. If you're a private, the sergeant tells you to do something, you do it. That's hierarchy. In fact, hierarchy and the whole way it's built up, you know, people think of, oh, this is a terrible thing, this hierarchy thing. No, it's not terrible at all. It's what's built the world. If we didn't have hierarchy, we'd probably be living in grass huts. Hierarchy is a beautiful thing. It's helped us to cooperate with each other from a hierarchical point of view, where one person's in charge and the other people follow what the person say. And think about it. Sports, the quarterback, he's in charge. He calls the signals. Everybody does what his signals say to do. So, hierarchy is not such a bad thing. It's not a terrible thing at all. It has really built the world up. It's important that we understand that hierarchy is something that's good. It's not something that's bad. But men usually have more of it than the women. Now, what do women have? Well, women have an in-group bias where they prefer other women. And also in that bias is a tendency to choose other women first, right? And on top of that, it's this thing about, well, let's all be the same. Let's all be the same. Because a standout in a woman's world sometimes is looked down upon. I've heard story after story about women who stood out at work and really did really, really well and got promoted. The other women would try and sabotage her because she was leaving this in-group. She was leaving the group. She was becoming more masculine. And there are a lot of women who are more masculine, who have this hierarchy thing. There are a lot of men who don't. But it's there for us. It's there in us. Most men are going to have more of the hierarchy, and that makes us different, especially when people don't have a clue about what this hierarchy thing does. What does it do? It makes men want to put out the behaviors that will make them look what? Independent. Independent. Because independence puts you higher and higher on the hierarchy. If you're a billionaire, you're independent. You're not dependent upon anybody to do anything. You are calling all of the shots. And so that's why men will try and appear independent whenever they can, because a dependent man is a shamed man. Our culture will actively shame men who are dependent. They will deny him services if he looks and acts dependent. Gosh, I remember this group of psychologists was talking about this a guy that gave a speech and cried, and how, the world must be changing. Now men's tears are accepted. Well, the guy that gave the speech and cried was the winner of the Heisman Trophy Award. And guess what? People who are at the top of the hierarchy, men who are at the top of the hierarchy, they have a different set of rules. They can do things that other men cannot even dream of. So if that man were to cry at his speech after winning the Heisman, yeah! If he were to laugh, yeah! If he were to be boring, yeah! Right? Because he won, he's the winner. But I want you to think about this. The guy who came in third or fourth, if he were to cry at his speech, do you think they'd be clapping for him? Do you think they'd be so proud he was able to cry? Probably not. Most people would look down on him. He's a loser. Oh boy. So men strive for status, and status is this independence thing. And what does that do to us as men? What it does is we want to put our best foot forward. We want to try and look as independent as possible. And so things like emotions, we want to not let people see if we can avoid it, right? We want to not look vulnerable, and emotions will tend to make us look vulnerable, and that drops like a rock in the hierarchy, if we look dependent. So, therapists don't understand this. Men from the time they're little boys are taught not to express stuff. And then they're taught that if you do express it, we're not going to really respect you, that your status will drop considerably. And so he's learned over the years to be independent, which is a really good thing. And he's learned how to deal with his emotions in his own way, which I hope you've seen my videos about how men deal with their emotions differently. And they deal with it just fine. They deal with it very well, but most people don't even have a clue about what the hell they're doing. Anyway, the men who don't want to appear dependent go into therapy. And what does the therapist say? Well, tell us what you're feeling today. She or he expects him immediately to take on a vulnerable, dependent role. Now, wait a minute. This is exactly what he's been practicing not doing for however many years, 30 or 40 years, and suddenly we expect him to do a 180 and turn around and be this open, vulnerable, dependent sort? No, no, no. That's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And this is the kind of thing that we need to understand about men. And women do not understand this at all. Oh, I forgot something else. We talk about the testosterone pushing from one side to push us to strive for status, but there's this other thing that happens from the other side, puts the squeeze play on men. The squeeze play, and that's a thing they call precarious manhood. This is the social push. Precarious manhood has been the last 10 or 15 years, the researchers have found out this thing called precarious manhood shows that around the world, boys, when they go through puberty, are not considered men. They have to prove it. And the men themselves have to keep proving they're men over and over and over again. Can you believe it? One of Vandello, I think, says something like, manhood is hard to gain and easily lost. And that's what he's talking about. That's why this push from the side, this precarious manhood thing, is pushing men in from the other side. You got testosterone and precarious manhood pushing us into this thing where it pushes us to strive for status and to be the best that we can be. And like I said, this is not all a bad thing. I mean, we've built the world through this. But we've got to understand these mechanisms that are pushing men into these positions. And therapists and women do not understand this. They don't understand even a little bit, because he strives to win, he strives to compete, and she scratches her head. Why does he always have to win? Why is his ego is so brittle he has to do X, Y, Z, because they don't understand what testosterone does. It pushes him to strive for status. It does a bunch of other things. It drops down the man's fear. It increases his capacity to take risks. And it does something also very important. It increases his threat vigilance. Think about hierarchy and threat vigilance. Threat vigilance says, if someone challenges you, if someone says you're an asshole, you fight back. That's called threat vigilance. You challenge him. You respond back. You don't sit on it. That's threat vigilance. Men have more of that than women do because of testosterone. Women see this and they go, what's wrong with him? Why does he have to defend everything? And, I can understand her perspective, because from her perspective of being in an in-group and wanting to be the same, that seems like crazy stuff. But from his perspective of being in a hierarchy, being pushed from both sides of testosterone and precarious manhood, from that perspective, and this threat vigilance thing, he's going to respond, and he probably should respond. We need to teach our boys these things. We need to teach our boys about threat vigilance, about testosterone, about precarious manhood, because you will not find this stuff in the literature. You will not find it in the daggone APA guidelines. And the same thing, this whole precarious manhood and testosterone and the strive for status and the hierarchy, it plays out again in stuff where men are probably not as likely to go to a doctor. Because why? They want to appear independent. So, we need to try and alter our services for men in order to try and increase them feeling independent. At the same time, we give them tests and the things they need to get, because this is an important thing. But we need to understand that men are different. We need to understand that we may need to try and create services that cater to the way men are. Because most services out there cater to the way women are, not to the way men are. Suicide's another sad tale of this hierarchy thing. In the hierarchy, you want to appear independent as much as possible, right? Well, guess what? That's why men will tend to do some active thing in order to heal their emotions, or they'll pull into solitude. Now, both of those things can be healing, but guess what? Both of those things pull us away from people who would yank us and say, come on, I'm going to the emergency room with your ass right now. Women, when they talk about it with their friends are more likely to yank them in and say, we're going to the ER. This is too much. But since men tend towards solitude and tend towards action and less interaction, they're less likely to go in and be yanked by a friend or a loved one. loved ones sometimes are so shocked at the suicide. What? I had no idea. Because he hasn't said much about what's going on. Anyway, this hierarchy thing plays into men's life from beginning to end in relationships, at work. You want to compete, you want to do the best you can, and it's something that men need to own and feel good about. This is not a bad thing, even though most of our culture is telling you, oh, there's something wrong with you because you just want to compete all the time and win all the time. Well, fuck that. How about a little bit of compassion for men and the squeeze play that's put on men? Because it's tough. It's not easy being a man. We need to start understanding that. We need to start understanding that a man is in a different position than women. We need to stop telling men they need to be more like women. And on that note, let's all remember, men are good, as are you. Come see me on Subscribestar and tell me what you think. I still have the Patreon site, but some people didn't like Patreon, so we started Subscribestar. Some good things are happening there. Come see me. So you all take care. Men are good. YouTube.